Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kishore Mahbubani. I'm the Dean of the Kuan School of Public Policy. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this dialogue with Mr. Pascal Lamy. I think many of you already know that when I make my introduction, I make 3 points at the Kuan School. The first point will be about the school. The second point about our speaker. And the third point about the topic that we're going to discuss here this afternoon. Now, firstly, about the school. Whenever we have a global luminary, right, Pascal Lamy coming to our school, we get new faces coming to visit us. And whenever we get new faces, we try and throw in a small commercial for the school. And especially for those of you from the business community and elsewhere, we try to tell you that, you know, the best thing you can do in the world is to support a school of public policy. Because if you support a school of public policy, we will promote good governance, and if you succeed in promoting good governance, it's good for your business, you'll get more profits. Except for the best investment you can make is to support a school of public policy. I'm sure you agree, Pascal, right? So that's the commercial for you. Now, on the speaker, I think I can tell from the full house today, and Pascal, I should assure you that we don't have a full house all the time like this. It's only when people like you come. The speaker, as you all know, is we have a very distinguished speaker. I can give you a half an hour description of his biography, but I'll give you a 3-minute short version of it. And I'll begin by saying that he's a graduate of 3 of the most prestigious schools in France, HEC, Sciences Po, and ENA. He began his career in the French civil service at the French Finance Ministry, Inspection Generale des Finances, and the Treasury Department. He then became an advisor to Finance Minister Jacques Delors and subsequently Prime Minister Pierre Mauroy. Now, from 84 to 94, this is important, Mr. Lamy worked in Brussels as Chief of Staff to the Commission President Jacques Delors, and then subsequently he became a banker. He joined the team in charge of rescuing Credit Lyonnais and later became CEO of the bank until its privatization. From 1999 to 2004, Pascal Lamy was Commissioner for Trade at the European Commission under Romano Prodi, and then with the support of the then President Jacques Chirac, he was elected to be Director General of WTO on 26 May 2005, and he had his term renewed on 30th April 2009, when he was re-elected unanimously by the WTO General Council for a second term of 4 years. So we have someone with a very distinguished career, and all this, of course, makes the topic, my third point, even more striking and relevant, because it is obvious to everybody, I hope, that multilateralism is becoming more and more important. And some of you may know this, I'm trying to complete a book on global governance this year. I begin the book by describing how the world has changed in the past when we live in 193 separate countries. It was like living in 193 separate boats. Now we no longer live in 193 separate boats, we live in 193 separate cabins on one boat, same boat, but without a captain or crew taking care of the world as a whole. And that explains why the world is adrift, because we don't have institutions of global governance that are able to keep up and deal with these new challenges and crises that we face in the world today. Therefore, the question about multilateralism and its future is one of the biggest questions of our time, and I'm truly grateful that to address one of the biggest questions of our time, we have one of the biggest global luminaries here to have this dialogue with us. So we discussed it beforehand. I thought we might begin by discussing a little bit about Europe, because Pascal has been very much involved in the European project, and we'll talk about what the prospects are like for Europe, and then from there onwards we'll broaden to discuss the global multilateralism situation and maybe talk about WTO, UN, and other global institutions. So I will spend about 20 to 25 minutes having a private exchange with Pascal. Then after that, the floor is open to all of you. Please stand up and ask some brilliant and difficult questions, because I think Pascal likes difficult questions. So, Pascal, let me begin with the first difficult question. What's the future of Europe? Oh, sorry, should I say, does Europe have a future? I wouldn't say that.
No, the politically correct answer is that future of Europe is in the hands of the Europeans, and they will decide whether or not they want to sort of follow course on European integration for the future. Now, if I had to bet, I would bet that's what they will do. Because basically they have no other choice in a planet which is globalizing and where big elephants are getting bigger every day. If the Europeans want to have their say in the world of 50 years from now, it's not going to be Germany, France, Spain, Italy that can do that. So if that's their will, if that's their ambition, they have no other choice than keep integrating more and more. But we've had, with the recent European crisis, we've had an episode which shows that European integration is not a sort of nicely, progressively flowing big river. There are tough times, and they still are trying to cope with what I would qualify as an integration crisis, which, by the way, is probably very relevant to what you just said, Kishore, about multilateralism. Europe is the only experience of proper supranational governance on this planet. Not that there are not regional integration processes in other parts of this planet, in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, but none of these processes has ever been as ambitious, as institutionally sophisticated as the European Union. Now, this integration crisis tells us something about the crisis in multilateralism. And this integration crisis, in a way, stems from the fact that the vision of the founding fathers in the 50s was very simple. What Robert Schuman called solidarité de fait. And the reasoning was very simple. Let's create the conditions for economic integration, and political integration will follow economic integration. Not that they were Marxists, and that, for believing that the infrastructure of the economy was creating the superstructure of governance. Robert Schuman was anything but a Marxist. But that was the purpose, that was the ambition. And that's how it worked. Insofar as each step of economic integration was accompanied by a step in political integration. And that remained true until, let's say, the 1990s, until Maastricht, which is a turning point because it really led to one of the most formidable ambitions of the European integration process, which was creating a single currency, which is a big step in any comparison of what economic integration and political integration is. We know that the tipping point probably is monetary integration. And then following this, for a number of reasons, constant reason being the reluctance of member states to cede more sovereignty to the supranational level, it has always been there. Another reason probably being that the enlargement of Europe following the fall of the Berlin Wall was inescapable and in a way probably quicker, faster than the founding fathers would have planned. at that time what started to appear was a discrepancy between the level of economic integration and the level of political integration. The economy has kept integrating technology, finance, production processes, infrastructures, the single currency. So the engines of economic integration were booming. Internal market, goods, largely, if not totally, and we might come back to that, done in services, but the political integration didn't follow. And as a result of that, there was a sort of discrepancy between a big economic solid leg of integration and a weak leg of political integration. And you know, having a big leg and a weak leg, something you can cope with if you walk. You can't run. But if you run, you just fall. And that's what the crisis obliged the Europeans to do, which is run. Because the level of financial integration was such, the sort of spreading of sovereign debt in the European financial system was everywhere. Everybody was buying the Italians, the Spanish, the French were buying Greek debt, the Greeks were buying German debt. So this level of integration was there. But suddenly the thing broke up and they did not have the level of political integration to cope with this crisis, hence this very lengthy, procrastinated, user-unfriendly process.
But you know, when you were there in all the crucial years when the euro was being conceived and designed and delivered, did you all think at that time that should we have plan B, that if for whatever reason one European country cannot stay within the eurozone, shouldn't we create an exit clause? And why is there no exit clause for, let's say, Greece or someone?
That wasn't planned at all. What was
you didn't dream that there'd be a crisis or imagine? Or
no. Some of us knew Delors, the first.
Jacques Delors. Yes.
Jacques Delors knew that in the Treaty of Maastricht, the level of monetary integration was very high as compared to the level of economic and political. He said at the time,
Jacques Delors.
He did the draft of the treaty for the monetary union, and the governments did not buy that. They bought the monetary union part, and the reason why they bought the monetary union part is that it wasn't a political problem to cede sovereignty on the currency because they had already recognized the independence of their central banks. So they had already sort of horizontally
given away
authority on central banks, and it was a question of doing this vertically, which is none of their problem. But on the economic side, what Delors suggested at the time is a much stronger integration with a larger budget at EU level. And they said, no, we'll take the European Union in your package, but we will not take what you suggest in terms of further economic and political integration. You know, and the Commission proposes, the members and the Council disposes. So he said at the time, what you've done is a very monetary union. You've called it an economic and monetary union, and it's very monetary and not very economic. So the diagnosis on where the default was pretty clear at the time.
So people knew that such problems could emerge?
Of course, they knew that such problems could emerge, not least because, as you know, there was a big debate among economists whether creating a monetary union in a suboptimal monetary zone. Look, remember the sort of American school of thought who said, no, it will never work because you don't have enough mobility of labor.
I was in a panel with Martin Feldstein in December in Milan, and he was saying exactly what you're saying, that from the beginning I said this would not work.
But I mean, the jury is still out whether Feldstein is right or not. They're muddling through. For the moment, It hasn't exploded. For the moment, nobody has left the monetary union.
Yeah.
So it's, and my own guess is that they will muddle through. At a cost of credibility, at a cost for the taxpayer, at a cost for the economy, but my own guess, but it's a guess, is that they will muddle through.
You know, when I was in Davos in January, it was very striking. All the Europeans were saying very strongly, very consistently, this project will not fail, including my good friend Klaus Regling, who was here as a EU fellow in our school. And then the non-Europeans were saying, nervous about when is it going to crash, when is it going to crash, and so on and so forth. And right now, as you know, the world has been feeling very uncertain about the future of Euro, the future of Greece. That now seems to be a feeling that's going in your direction, that we're going to stumble through in one way or another, and we're going to make it.
But what remains to be seen is whether they will draw the lessons of this crisis. I mean, there are elements in this direction. The treaty they've just signed is a remake of
the Financial Stability Pact,
is a remake of the Stability Pact that accompanied the Maastricht Treaty, but it was a soft law. So they've now realized that if they have a monetary union, they need a solid budgetary convergence union. So that's, but they haven't yet recognized that they need a more common economic union, and that if you can't adjust your competitiveness differences through monetary devaluation, and if it cannot be addressed by a mobility of labor the way the US transfer people from Michigan to Florida, then you still have a problem. So they've, as usual, they're crab walking, but there still is a huge resistance in national political systems in Europe to cede sovereignty to Brussels. And it could be expected in a way, but it also shows that what the Europeans have not fixed is the problem. They've created a supranational institutional system of governance. They have a quasi-government. They have a quasi-Senate. They have a quasi-parliament. They have a Court of Justice. So, if you read Montesquieu, you got it all right on the recipe book. But there's not the element of the emotional element that it is a relevant public policy space where public policies can develop, where people can debate. And the best evidence of that is look at the rate of participation in European elections. In theory, people should be happy to vote for a European Parliament who takes major decisions on the European part of the competences. It doesn't work. The rate of participation in European elections has been going down permanently. So what they've missed is not the institutional part, it's the legitimacy part. They've been, and we'll probably come back to that in the discussion, Kishore, they've been good at the efficiency part. They've been terribly bad at the legitimacy part. And this tells us something about, more generally, global governance. Creating a new, inevitably distant space of political legitimacy is a chemistry which they haven't succeeded and which in a way remains mysterious. I mean, it's understandable in many ways because your sort of first sense of belonging is
to your country.
Proximity, and it's your national identity which has been worked out and forged by the way you've been taught history at school and by a mythology and by a sense of belonging which is there. To accept governance, you need, in a way, to accept that you belong to a group that needs governance. a sort of, it's togetherness that creates, it's the feeling of togetherness that creates the legitimacy of a governance system. It's the notion that, after all, we're on the same boat, and as you said, you know, we need a captain.
Yeah.
So that's where, for the moment, the Europeans have missed the target, and remains to be seen if, how, when they will do it. So it's a bit more than sort of normal expected reluctance of, you know, traditional, used to be great powers of this planet like UK and France, which, by the way, in terms of DNA resistance to supranationality are quite identical. Just happened that one is an island and another one is
that's one thing the British and French agree on completely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just that geography makes it a bit more difficult for the French to be like the British, but you know, frankly speaking, that's their DNA.
Yeah. And anyway, I can tell before we move on to the world as a whole that if you decide to step down from the WTO job next year, you might have a great future to save Europe. There might be a big job waiting for you there to try and see what we can do to lift the European project to a higher level.
No comment.
Sometimes no comments are very powerful, you know this. So let's move on to the rest of the world and the lessons that we will learn from this thing. And I think from the Asian point of view, I suspect the big lesson coming out of this European experiment is don't be too ambitious. Let's follow the Asian method of pragmatically doing cooperation in trade, on health, on education, and so on and so forth. Let's not have a big project. Let's not try to have a common currency, and so on and so forth. Europe has told us that this is a bridge too far. And that will be the lesson that the rest of the world will learn. Is that the right or the wrong lesson?
Well, I'm sure this is the lesson you, Kishore, will draw. You like. I've read what you write, I listen to what you say, and it's sort of typical Asian pragmatism, not big dreams, not big institutional cathedrals which you plan to build it this way.
Big architecture.
Let's do it step by step. Okay. And you may be right, maybe. But what you will not
got half a chance.
what you will not be able to escape is this logic that economic integration and political integration have to go hand in hand. If you succeed, take ASEAN for instance, which is a very diverse group, but where there's been a constant momentum for economic integration. Look at the report with these wise men in ASEAN did 3 years ago, which I read it and I fell from my chair because of its incredibly institutional ambition. I would never have expected that this sort of extremely pragmatic and experienced politicians and wise people would say we need common institutions. Now, it wasn't agreed as such but there is a threshold of economic integration that implies political integration. Now, and then you bump into, in a way, the Europeans have a common platform of values. They agree on what government is about. They agree on what a reasonably cohesive society is about. They agree that this is about democracy. They agree that this is about market economy. They agree that it's about Sozialmarktwirtschaft, a social market economy. I mean, if you look at their
except UK maybe.
No. Look, what determines facts in these things is figures. on this world, you have three models of social integration. You have the EU model, where government expenditure to GNP is 40 to 50%. You have US and Japan, where government to GDP is 30%. And you have China and India, where government expenditure to GNP is between 10 and 20%. Now, the Europeans agree on the level of social cohesion. So, and yet, although they have a very, in a way, solid civilizational platform they agree on, all through Europe, they still have this problem of political integration. Now, think about ASEAN. At some stage, you will bump into this problem. And you will need a explicit platform of values that people accept, depending, of course, on the balance you give to political systems between sort of coercion and adhesion. And this mix in Asia is, let's say, still unstable. It's still to come to see whether with development, and all these countries are developing incredibly rapidly and efficiently, whether the governance will switch to sort of democracy, individual freedom, or whether there will remain an element of, let's say, group coercion. So, we'll see.
By the way, I'm going to give away a big secret. The reason why the report of all the elders, the wise men, was endorsed is that, unlike you who read the report, no one here read the report, they just endorsed it, which is good, by the way. If they had read the report, they would be much more cautious.
But I mean, look, I'll tell you an anecdote on this. I remember full well discussing this with the then Malaysian trade minister, who was Rafida Aziz, and who'd been there for years. And I discussed that with her and said, Rafida, I'm amazed at what I read in this report. And she said, I'm just as amazed as you. No way, a technocrat secretary general of this organization is going to sit at the table of the heads of more ministers. He should have a table behind. And that said it all. And the vision they have that it's sovereignty driven, or whether there is an element of supranational governance, guidance, and that's.
But you see, despite all that, they endorsed the report and they moved on. They've done some additional things. They've set a bit more ambitious targets. So they've sort of at least moved forward.
Yeah, and in a way, what's happened within ASEAN on Myanmar, for instance, and I'm not a diplomat, so I have to be very careful about what I say, but there's been an element of ASEAN endeavors, and so far some success because of the integration process. And it probably wouldn't not have happened this way. So in terms of efficiency, results, not just ambitions and speeches, there is something there that shows that it works.
I agree. Now, in another 5-10 minutes of our discussion before I throw the floor open, let's switch to the global level, and let's start with your organization, the World Trade Organization. And as you know, the big question in everybody's minds here is what's happening to the Doha round, what do you see is happening, and do you see any kind of hope of any kind of results, positive results? I mean, it doesn't have to be a comprehensive agreement, could be limited results here and there. You were discussing earlier about trade facilitation and all that. Do you see hope of the WTO making progress in some areas?
Yes, definitely. But for the time being, not the big package as it was envisaged 10 years ago, with a sort of total revamping of the WTO rulebook on 20 chapters among the sort of 50 chapters which 20 20 chapters had been agreed for sort of a new edition. It's like you've written a rule book, and edition number 9, which is what it was, it's the 9th round. The editor instruction was you need to change 20 chapters of the 50 which are there. And these are the 20 chapters we agree, and this is what will need to be in these 20 chapters. Not just that they need to be changed, but they need to be changed to say this, 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 and this. That will not happen short term. And it will not happen short term because in the meantime, the world has changed. The world has changed from a software, a diplomatic software, which was sort of north-south, and which is the diplomatic software of the mandate of the Doha round, a development round, which was to address the remaining unfairness of the international trade regime, which developing countries were resenting. That was the software of the round. And we've moved to a world where this simple north-south division doesn't work anymore. We move to a world where you have rich countries, you have poor countries, and in the middle you have countries you don't know whether they are poor or rich. Why the Doha round is stalled is because of a basic disagreement between US and China about what is China. The US are saying China is a rich country with many poor people. And China is saying, no, no, no. China is a poor country with many rich people. And that says it all, why they cannot agree on the trade regime of China for the next 10 or 20 years. The US view is that China has now emerged. So level the playing field, reciprocity, which was the rule of the game between which countries, between Europe, Canada, US, Japan, Australia. That was the rule of the game. So it was reciprocity for rich countries and flexibilities for poor countries. So the US are now saying reciprocity and a bit of flexibility, because we recognize that Chinese GNP per head is 1/10 of the US, which still indicates that they may have specific developmental challenges. China is saying, okay, we agree that we have to take obligations to the systems that are different from Kenya or Laos, but we still are poor countries. So flexibilities plus a good dose of reciprocity. And that's where the mix, for the moment, doesn't unfold. Now, does this mean that the WTO is stalled? No, for several reasons. First, the WTO is more than the Doha round. The WTO has a legislative function, an administrative function, a judiciary function, and a technical assistance function. Those are the three businesses we're in. Now, the Aid for Trade technical capacity building is working full speed. The litigation system is doing extremely well. It's the only international litigation system that compulsory for sovereign nation states. I mean, they've gone way beyond the principle of sovereignty, because if the appellate body of WTO says you're wrong, you have to comply, which is, there's no precedent in international jurisdiction that this happens. And the monitoring surveillance part is working well. We've tested this during the crisis. The fact that there has been no significant protectionist wave is largely due to the capacity of the system to track, sort of analyze, peer review, discuss all trade policy developments. Now, So these three parts, which, by the way, absorb 85% of my resources. I have to run this small business, which the W Secretariat is, and in the allocation of resources, I've never allocated more than 15% of the resources of the Secretariat to the legislative part. And these 85% of the resources are doing their job, and I think to the satisfaction of WTO members. Now, then you're left with the legislative function, which is part with the round, not only with the round. There are rules negotiations or market access negotiations that are outside the round. For instance, government procurement. We just revamped, end of last year, after 3 years of negotiation, the government procurement agreement, which is a trilateral agreement where some of our members open part of their public procurement to one another. There are areas like duty-free, quota-free, which is more or less part of the round, but also outside the round, where more and more countries, not only developed countries, with the exception of the US, are providing duty-free, quota-free to leader countries, which is a big plus for them in terms of market access. There are areas like the Information Technology Agreement, which might move forward and which are not with the round. There are areas where the extension of the perimeter of rules is part of the rules making, which is, for instance, the accession of Russia. It's rules making when you extend the perimeter of the rules you have to a new territory. Now, what remains true is that the 20 topics which were bundled together in the round won't happen for the moment as a big package, as a sort of, all or nothing. And what we are trying to do, and ministers gave a sort of green light to go in this direction in December when we had our last ministerial conference in Geneva, is try and extract from this big bundle package a few topics which might move on their own merits, like, for instance, trade facilitation, which is a very technical agreement, but which is about streamlining, simplifying what you have to do to move goods through borders. And that's something of a huge potential economic value. Most serious economic studies have said that half of the economic benefits from the round would stem from trade facilitation. Same in services where maybe some progress in market access would be doable, and given what national and the international economy is today, opening markets and services is hugely more trade opening than reducing a tariff of chemical products or electrical machinery by 2 or 3%.
One last question before we go to the floor. I like your characterization of what's happening between the US and China and the different perceptions. But if you want to be just a bit fairer to China, if you look at
I have to be neutral, and
I know. But I'm just saying, if you look at the US position in terms of, I remember in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, US presidents would always speak out openly in favor of free trade, Today, this is a fact. President Obama, when he gives a speech, will not mention the word free trade, because the word free trade is perceived to be toxic in the American political context. And that's a very big shift with global consequences. So what do you think can be done to move the sort of intellectual or policy-making establishment within America and push it back towards greater advocacy of free trade? What would you do if you were in the United States?
Well, I'll start with an anecdote which I haven't checked, but se non è vero è ben trovato, as the Italian said. If it's not true, it nevertheless is a very good story.
I like good stories.
I was told this by a reliable American source. They've polled American public opinion, and they've asked 3 questions to a scientifically established panel. So good poll, not just phone thing. Question number 1, is trade good for the US? Question number 2, if you buy a lottery ticket, you believe you will win. Question number 3, do you believe in the existence of extraterrestrials? Now, the result was that you had 3 times more people who believe they will win if they buy a lottery ticket than people who believe that trade is good for the US economy. And you have 2 times more people believing in the existence of extraterrestrials than people who believe that trade is good for the US economy. So that gives you, I think, a reasonable snapshot of where US public opinion is. And public opinion matters,
Yes.
obviously, and should matter. So in these conditions, if you try and cross-evidence this anecdote with what you hear about China in the US presidential campaign.
What Mitt Romney is saying, yeah, for example, yeah.
Not only Mitt Romney,
Yeah.
I mean, there is an anti-trade feeling in the US for the moment. I mean, I think it's a reality, it's a political reality. Now, you know, if there's an anti-trade feeling in Argentina or Ecuador, or it's a problem, but I think roughly the world can live with that. If it's the US, it's more a big problem, because I don't see how global economic governance generally, and including on trade, can really move forward without the US co-leading, at least.
Yes.
They've been leading this trade opening system consistently for 50 years. They've been, the Europeans have been pulling, at the time, you know, it was US and EU was pulling the cart, and sometimes US was more pulling than EU because EU had its own internal problems on agriculture.
Yeah.
So the system is a result of strong US leadership. And I think we are now witnessing what happens in a world where on this issue it's less strong.
Okay, question time. My counterpart in Harvard Kennedy School, David Hell, would say a good question should have 3 elements. 1, identify yourself. 2, keep it short. And 3, should end with a question mark. So please.
Hi, Pascal. We met before. I'm from the World Toilet Organization.
He's a competitor. He's also running WTO.
Yeah, I know that. We have 3 WTOs on this planet. The World Toilet Organization, the World Tourism Organization, and the World Trade Organization.
Oh, 3. Okay.
I gave you the order of relevance for an average citizen.
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
And they're all together because you're worried about things going too slow, but mine is I'm worried they go too fast like diarrhea. Okay, the world has 7 billion people, and only 3 billion are in our formal economy. Given that the world is slowing down, what is the WTO doing with the 4 billion base of pyramid marketplace, which is worth about $5 trillion? Perhaps it's time to open it up, build market infrastructure, and make it a very vibrant economy.
For the bottom 4 billion, you mean?
Yeah, base of the pyramid.
Look, the bottom 4 billion will benefit of trade opening like the rest of the planet has done before. There's no doubt that a large part of the developmental successes we've registered for the last 2 or 3 decades have a lot to do with trade opening. Now, not that trade opening works 100% for everybody, everywhere, anytime, in any conditions. There are conditions. It's like a sort of, like a chemical reactions. There need to be proper conditions of pressure, temperature, and the proper catalyzers that transform this simple Ricardian principle that if you do something better than I do it, and if I do something better than we do it, we both win with trade. That remains fundamentally true. It has to be combined with the fact that there's also a sort of Schumpeterian element, which is that your people doing what I do and my people doing what you do will have a problem. Understandably, because the efficiency equation goes to the cost of reshuffling your production system to make it more efficient, including in importing what I do better than you, and the other way around. Now, these Ricardian and sort of Schumpeterian principles, which explain basically what's happened in world trade for the last 50 years, work more and more efficiently. And the reason for that is technology. I spent again part of my morning in visiting the port operation on the port of Singapore. I went there 5 or 6 years ago. It's night and day. And 5 or 6 years ago was night and day as compared to what it was 10 years ago. There's incredible efficiency gains that are reducing the cost of distance and that are technology driven. Now, this is available for a new wave of emerging countries. And whether it's formal trade or informal trade, we don't mind. What matters is the efficiency gains that translate into growth, and depending on the quality of domestic policies on infrastructure, on education, on innovation, on redistribution, that then lead to growth and poverty reduction. So that's coming. And there's one continent where it's obviously coming and which not enough people on this planet have spotted, which is Africa. It's coming. And it's coming this way. And it's coming big way.
Yeah, I agree. Please.
Hi, hello.
Can
My
you
name
identify
is
yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Luz. I represent the group of alumni of Sciences Po Paris here in Singapore, and I am also a banker. So this is my question. According to you, how guilty are the banks in the European crisis, and how in the future they can sustain and support multilateralism?
How? Who are you talking about?
Banks and the financing industry.
How can the bank and financial industry help multilateralism?
Look,
They can pay the debts back, you know, and not ask the taxpayers to pay the debts of the banks.
this crisis that exploded in 2005 is a result of an industry which was globalized and not multilaterally regulated. It's a very good example of a sort of discrepancy between de facto globalization through expansion of market capitalism with no proper governance, no proper rules. It was the most globalized industry on this planet and the less regulated. And I know that. I know full well because WTO is a sort of hub between all these regulatory sort of places. And that's why it happened. It wasn't regulated. It's not because it was too open. I often take the example of Canada and US, which are totally open to one another. On the one side of the border, the financial system exploded. On the other side, nothing happened. 100% can. Why? Because the Canadian financial system was properly regulated, over-open, and the American system was not properly regulated. And the only solution, if you want this sort of thing not to happen, is to have a global regulatory framework, which is, by the way, what the G20, the FSB have been trying to do for now 4 or 5 years, and let's say, looks pretty painful. So, that's the solution. And I don't think we should repeat situations where we have a de facto global system without a proper governance system of this de facto global system. That's a recipe for huge trouble.
Great. Now let's, you only have 15 minutes. Let's take 3 questions. One from this mic, Razin, and then the third mic there. Okay, so we'll start with you, please. Deborah, right? Am I correct? Yes.
Yeah, Deborah Elms, Tomasic Foundation Center for Trade and Negotiations. It seems to me it may not be the crisis that killed multilateralism, but one big risk for multilateral institutions, especially for trade, is the rise of free trade agreements, and particularly the rise of trade agreements, high-quality regional trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I'm wondering how the WTO responds to the rise of FTAs. You're sitting in one of the countries that is at the forefront of the FTA revolution, many of which I think present risks to an organization like the WTO for splintering multilateral trade institutions into smaller and smaller parts. And I'd just like to get your response to how a multilateral institution responds to the proliferation of FTAs.
Okay. One question. Second question, this is my colleague, Razin Sally. Yeah.
Monsieur Lamy, good evening. Not a question about the WTO, but about Europe in the world. Ralph Dahrendorf referred to skeptical Europeans as opposed to Eurosceptics. So I'm not going to ask this question as a British Eurosceptic, rather as a skeptical European. And a skeptical European wouldn't buy your logic of political integration inevitably following economic integration. He would say that pushing the envelope beyond the single market, given our diverse economic and above all political and social differences in Europe, would inevitably lead to failure. It would be neither feasible nor desirable. So what would we be left with Europe in the world? We'd be left with the single market and the power that goes with it, but beyond that we'd be left with relatively declining middle powers, that's to say Britain, France and Germany. Is that such a bad thing? Would be my one question. And my related question, perhaps cast in a more positive light, you haven't really said anything about this so far. What would the kind of United States of Europe, that's to say a politically integrated Europe that you wish for, add to the world beyond the status quo?
Okay, third question.
Michael Ewing-Chow from the Faculty of Law and US. I had a privilege of listening to you, Mr. Lamy, in 2005.
Can you speak louder?
To your microphone.
Right. Michael Ewing-Chow, Faculty of Law, National University of Singapore. I had a privilege of listening to you in 2005 when you described economic integration as being, in the European model, happy families, and the sort of ASEAN model, good neighbors. And I wanted to echo Razin's point a little bit and push you a little bit on this issue. Is political integration necessary from economic integration? And the reason why I ask this is, it seems to me that we may also be having different views of what economic integration is. In the ASEAN model, it could well be much more political cooperation, governance, transparency, very much like the WTO. And in such a situation, we have not seen an impetus towards political integration to move on these issues. In the European model, because of the Schuman Declaration and the belief in the sort of democratic peace theory, that developed a sort of agenda of its own. So again, just to push you on this point, is political integration really necessary for economic integration? Thank you.
Okay, first question about FTAs and TPP. And to quote my colleague Tomiko, Singapore is the most promiscuous on FTAs. And then the second two questions pushing you on political integration.
Yeah. I've always said that if Singapore can find a trade negotiator on the moon, Singapore will negotiate a free trade agreement with the moon.
Tomorrow.
Now, and you know, it's pretty obvious why Singapore is negotiating free trade agreements with everybody, because it's a free trade place. So for the price of guaranteeing that you will remain free trade, you get benefit from others. It's a win-win game. They've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. So who would resist such a game? Now,
So Singapore is doing the right thing. Yeah?
I mean, it's doing the cleverest thing. Now, whether the cleverest thing is always the right thing, that's a matter of philosophy. Now, how do we respond to this proliferation of bilateral, preferential, regional trade agreements? The answer is it depends. In theory, if you look at Article 24 of GATT, the principle is that multilateral rules prevail over bilateral rules. But this principle was established at a time where obstacles to trade were mostly tariffs and quantitative restrictions. We know that in the world of today and tomorrow, most obstacles to trade are non-tariff barriers, regulatory discrepancies. Now, whether Article 24 in its philosophy applies in the same vein to non-tariff barriers as it applied to tariff barriers, not sure. Because that was, the purpose of Article 24 was to avoid trade diversion. It was to ensure that if there is a derogation to the multi-favored nation principle, that would be waived by the multilateral system. So that's the principle. And again, whether this primacy, which was established at a time of a certain technology of obstacle to trade, applies in the same magnitude to another technology of obstacle to trade, is a question that deserves a bit of research. Now, if you look at facts now, some of these free trade agreements may lead to a multilateral optimum. If tariff preferences proliferate, they are self-eroding. The more preferences members of the WTO give to each other, the less preferences they give to each other. If I give you a trade preference, and I give you a trade preference, in giving you a trade preference, I'm eroding the trade preference I've given you. And by the way, you're going to do the same with him. And at the end of the day, again, the more trade preferences, the less trade preferences. So there is a sort of automatic convergence to the asymptote of multilateral tariff liberalization, which is zero. So in this sort of case, fine, there is a synergy, there is a sort of inbuilt automatic convergence between bilateral trade regulation, bilateral trade opening, and the multilateral system. Fine.
If it goes towards zero.
But it goes to a zero.
Yeah.
It goes to a zero. I mean, that's the law of history. It is going to zero. And again, the more preferences people give to each other, the more you go to the zero. Now, then there's another scenario where, given what obstacles today are and what they will be, which is regulatory discrepancies, bilateral, regional, regulatory convergence, which is what you need to address discrepancies in obstacle to trade, whether you call it harmonization, mutual recognition, I mean all these toolbox of rules, rules convergence, depends. In the first case, you have a sort of automatic creation of a level playing field. In the second case, you have a possibility of scattering the playing field. If there is a car emission standard between US and Korea, and there is a different car emission standard between EU and Korea, because US and EU car emission standards are different, you don't get the benefits of economies of scale. On the contrary, and if more and more of these bilateral convergences happen, you de-globalize the economy. And you lose a lot of efficiencies which come from leveling the playing field. So whether these bilateral, regional, plurilateral agreements will converge or diverge, jury is still out. I have no clue of what, at the end of the day, will be in the TPP. And if anybody here can tell me what will be in the TPP when it will be concluded, some years ahead from now, I have a bottle of champagne ready. I'm not even asking you. I'm not
French bottle.
Yeah, only French champagne.
You don't allow anybody else to use the word.
So I'm not even asking the one that would get the bottle to have it right.
Yeah.
I'm just asking to give me a proper definition of what will be in the TPP when it will be concluded in terms of market access, agriculture, industrial goods, regulatory convergence, environmental legislation, subsidies, and the rest. So I don't know. I have no answer to your question because I don't know what's in there. And I'm not sure negotiators know either, at least for the moment. Now, Razan Sali with his usual Euro-skepticism.
Well, you're aware of that, huh?
Of course, he writes it everywhere. and of course, and he takes, and that's the clever thing about Eurosceptics, he takes example of Rolf Dahrendorf, who looks like being a German, but in reality who was a Brit. So
a Brit with a German name is very dangerous.
Yeah, of course, and especially in this sort of debate. Now, what you gave yourself your answer to your question, Razan, when you said it will have the power of a single market. Now, what is the power of a single market? A single market has no power. It just is more. It's a big market which is more efficient than a small market. But it doesn't have a power. It has a market power because if you operate on this market, then you may make economies of scale which make it easier to operate. But it doesn't have a power. It's not a political thing. It's a condition which is necessary in order to have a political influence, if you so wish. But it's nothing political in itself. So the issue lies in the level of ambition. And I never call that United States of Europe because it's too much of a parallel with a system which inevitably will be very, very different. But what a proper political integration of Europe is about the Europeans' version of modernity to be available on this planet. We have different versions of modernity available. The American one has its own features. The Chinese one has its own features. The European one has its own features. Now, if they want their own version of modernity to coexist with other models, and I think they've understood full well after a few centuries that their version of modernity would not prevail over the others. That's the lesson of European history, which, by the way, makes them sometimes a bit pessimistic and a bit cautious about the future, because others have not had the same experience. The US still have the ambition of their version of modernity being adopted by the rest of the world. The Chinese probably do not have yet the ambition of their version of modernity to be adopted by the rest of the world. Now, what matters for the Europeans is whether they want this version to be available. Again, not as a dominant, but as one of the versions of civilization in the future. An internal market will not provide you with that. It's, in my view, as simple as that. the last question about how much political integration you need to ensure economic integration, I mean, is the question we've been discussing here this afternoon from the very beginning. And we've looked at the European thing, we've looked at the WTO, we've looked at financial regulation. In a world where technology and market capitalism, which are facts whether you like them or not, are pushing for more integration, you need more governance. You have global integration, which is pulled by economics and technology, more precisely by technology, hence economics. And on this I remain a sort of basic Marxist, not in all the consequences, that's the way it works. You need global governance. And global governance is about politics. It's not just about technicalities. It's about politics. The reason why we had no proper international governance in the financial system was not because this issue had not been discussed. I was a Sherpa, a G8 Sherpa, 10 years between 85 and 94. And I did 10 G8 summits in a row as the European President Commission Sherpa. During these 10 years, this issue, whether we need or not proper global financial regulation, was raised permanently. And you had on one side the French, the Germans, the Canadians, the Japanese, who were saying we need that, and you had on the other side the US and the British who said no, we don't need that. The first one was saying there are risks in the system which should be hedged, and the others were saying maybe, but if you do that the way you suggest to do it, this will kill financial innovation. It was a political debate. And at the end of the day, like always in the international system, the one that says no prevails because you need a consensus to move things forward. So, this is a political issue. And as always, you need global rules because we live in a way in a global society. We may not feel it this way, but that's the reality of today. And you will not get global rules without negotiations. And these negotiations will not unfold on purely technical grounds. There is an element of politics because there is an element of value in that. What matters most, is it innovation or is it hedging the risks? At the end of the day, is a purely political question. It has to do with your imagination. It has to do with the values you have in mind. It has to take another example to not to focus too much on financial issues, GMOs. And we have this in WTO.
Genetically modified
organisms. Should they be authorized or banned? You've got two cultures on this planet. One says should be authorized until it hasn't proven a damage. The other culture say, we don't know. We only authorize if we believe it's not going to create a damage. Now, what's the solution? A political discussion between people who, in their mind, have a dream which is innovation, which is higher than the nightmare they have, which is a crisis. And the dream and nightmare on the other side is inverse. And this is value-based. It has to do, at the end of the day, with what's good and what's bad. What your dreams are about what's good, and your nightmares are about what's bad. Take another issue like animal welfare. There are peoples on this planet who say the rules of international trade should recognize a high standard for animal welfare. Pigs should not be transported in lorries of a certain, without a certain dimension, temperature conditions, because otherwise they'll be harmed. Others would say, sorry, but not my problem. I want to be able to sell my pig because I have a comparative advantage in producing pigs, and whether they're happy or not, I prefer my people to be happy, and then we'll see later. And I'm giving you the example because trade, each time trade...
You know that pigs is very important in the diet here.
Of course I know. I could have taken chicken. The Europeans have now a standard for hen cages laying eggs so that European hens are reasonably happy. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
It's true. They have a minimum acreage, surface per hen, which, by the way, some Europeans now say, hey, laying an egg in Europe is getting costly. So we have a comparative disadvantage, which should be compensated by a premium. Otherwise, I want non-happy hens' eggs to be banned at the entry of the European Union, because I'm not competing. My happy hens, okay, they're happy, but the other ones are more productive. So again, I'm giving you these three examples because it shows how much these trade connections in reality interconnect value systems. And you will not have global rules without a global debate on values, which allow you to broker a compromise. It's like security, freedom. I'm all in favor of security. I'm all in favor of freedom. It just happened that from time to time there's a contradiction which needs to be politically decided. So, and of course, doing this in a national system is a sort of regular habit. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, this will be decided by a majority vote. Now, doing this in the European level is more difficult. And most of the time, it will now be decided by a majority vote, but a specific majority. They started with a qualified unanimity, and then when they realized that unanimity did not work, they moved to a qualified majority, which is not 50% plus 1.
60.
And now they've moved to a double majority, which is a majority of states and populations, which is probably the sort of rational federalist principle. Now, then you go at the global level, and it mostly works by consensus. But at each of these levels, you will need to have a political debate. Simply, it's easy to have a political debate at home in a national system. It's more complex at European system because the sense of belonging is getting further, and it's incredibly difficult in the international system because it's even further from the roots of legitimacy, and the roots of legitimacy are proximity. So I often said, in audiences like this kind, that the reason why I have these reasonably firm views on this is because I experienced the three states of mass in governance, solid, liquid, gaseous. I started in the French administration, which is a pretty solid system. Then I moved to the European system, which is liquid, somewhere not that solid, but not gaseous anymore. And then I moved to the international system, which is totally gaseous, although I'm representing an organization which is clearly on the liquid side of this gaseous system. Not least because we have rules. We have a dispute settlement, compulsory. But I can tell you, the rest of the system remains pretty gaseous. And we have to make it at least a bit liquid, if not solid, if we want the global challenges of this planet to be addressed. Otherwise, we will have exactly what we had with the financial industry.
Well,
an explosion. And it will take us 10 years to get out of this big hole, which we collectively have decided to create. It was not an event coming from Mars. Humans decided, with their own procedures, that they would not globally regulate finance. It was a decision that was taken, even if by default. Consequences of that can be drawn on many aspects of international life, starting with environment, for instance, which is also a huge challenge. If you don't do that, then you're digging a hole, and that may be the difference between a more brilliant future or a bleaker future.
Well, we began this discussion realizing that we live in a very difficult and complex world out there, and we came here to get insights from Pascal on what's really happening. I think we can confidently say, Pascal, you gave us many fascinating insights into how difficult and how complex the global order at all these levels. I shall now go back tonight and dream of happy chickens and unhappy pigs as one indication of the global spectrum of values. But I must say, your very last comment also is very, very telling about the solidity of national governance, the liquidity of regional governance, and the gaseous nature of global governance. I think captures very well the challenges that we face. And I think thanks to your good work here, and thanks to us working together here in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, I hope over time we will succeed in making the whole world more liquid and less gaseous. So thank you very much.